call the meeting to order. I will begin by acknowledging that we are in Treaty 1 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. I'll introduce the panel members. To my left, we have Terry Linklater and Richard Whitewright to my far left. The Assessor today will be David Penner. Our Administrative Assistant today will be Bella Novo. I'm Marcel Larondo. I'll be chairing. We will be hearing applications for revision in the assessment rule in accordance with the Municipal Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit the discussions to those matters. The statements that the applicant or the assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony. Anyone speaking to the matter must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessment of properties is not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council. It's independent of it and the City Administration, and it makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decision with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value of classification, or to the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to an application of exemption from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. Swear to me, please.
David Thomas George Penner.
And you swear to the most right present the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Please state your full name.
Kenneth Thomas Leslie.
And you swear to the most right present the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you.
Mr. Penner, we'll start with file number, address 612 Dufferin Avenue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the file number is 19-1665. The roll number is 14100068100. The address being 612 Dufferin Avenue, and the owner of this property is Santorini Dairies Inc. The preliminary matter on this is we are seeking a penalty for non-cooperation under Section 53(3)(b) of the MAA, and if any reduction in assessment is ordered, that it follows Section 54(3)(2) of the MAA. The basis of the request for a deferral penalty is that the information submitted to us is incomplete. If you'll turn to page 12, please, of the brief. This is the mailer that was submitted to us. As you can see, there is no income information or expense information. We understand that this is a fully owner-occupied premise. As such, we wouldn't expect income information, but we would expect the expense information to be filled out, which it hasn't been. So that's the basis for our non-compliance request.
Mr. Leslie, are you contesting it?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Is there a requirement of the department when they receive incomplete information to then contact the registered owner and try to clarify?
I'm not sure of the normal procedure in that. All I know is there's no expense information given.
So what you're saying, Mr. Penner, there was no follow-up by the department, no certified notice sent saying the information was incomplete?
I don't believe so.
In order to comply with the Act?
Yes, I don't believe there was a second.
Any questions, Gary?
So it looks like on page 2 of the brief that it was completed the previous year?
Yes.
No more questions. Thanks.
Richard?
Just looking through your brief, I can't find a mailer or any other information. Do you normally send that out when you're requesting when you have a non-quap? Do you not normally include that
If
evidence?
we don't receive any response, normally we would send a registered letter. In this case, we did receive a response, so we wouldn't.
So you wouldn't include that evidence?
We wouldn't submit a registered letter.
Okay. So the non-quap then is incomplete evidence provided, just so I understand that.
That's
in my
correct,
mind.
yes.
Thank you, sir. No further questions.
Are you aware if they changed accountants since the last year? Or I noticed that this one came from an accountant. His address is on, his name is on there.
I'm not sure who did it previously, so I can't really comment on that.
Do you have anything to add?
Just to clarify, we are not the accountants for the registered owner. My understanding is Richard Gamble responded, who's the accountants for Santorini Dairies, responded. And I think the document speaks for itself.
And you weren't aware that they hadn't?
No, I had no contact with the registered owner prior to this referencing.
Okay. If you could leave it with us for a few minutes while we discuss it.
Switched, isn't it?
Call the meeting back to order. We're ruling we're accepting the request of the city, so you'll have to go first. Do I get papers? So this evidence is a rebuttal evidence,
Yes.
is that correct? You're okay with him presenting his rebuttal before you put your...
I'll allow it.
Okay. On with your rebuttal against the city's information, which we haven't heard yet, by the way.
Right. The subject property, 612 Dufferin Avenue, roll number 14100068100. The registered owner, Santorini Dairies, Inc. And Santorini Dairies operates a special purpose dairy processing facility on Dufferin. Attached in my rebuttal brief is a copy of the purchase and sale agreement. Accepted by the court. This was a transaction that occurred June 16, 2014. And on page 5, the purchase price is $1,050,000. The purchase of the subject property was actually for two properties. It had been operated as a dairy processing facility at 612 Dufferin Avenue, and there was also a storage lot located at 599 Jarvis Avenue. The purchase price for 612 Dufferin was $1 million, and for 599 Jarvis was $50,000. What you have on page 1 of my rebuttal is of course a copy of the assessor's income value summary. The subject property is one building, special purpose for dairy processing. It has a plan area of 13,772 square feet. Page 2 of my rebuttal is a copy of the business assessment notice for the subject property. And you'll note that the total premise area is 13,772 square feet. I have used the same rental rate because, of course, the rental rate, there is no rental rate, it's an imputed rate. And so I've used the same rental rate as used for business assessment purposes of $7.80 a square foot, which is the same as the assessor. I've applied the parameters, 6% vacancy, 2% other, and a shortfall at the $3.75 a square foot, and to arrive at an NOI of $95,858. I have then used a cap rate, which is included, is the part of the assessor's brief, of 7.8%, which is the 80th percentile median for industrial properties in the city of Winnipeg, as gathered by the City of Winnipeg Assessment Department. Applying that 7.8% cap rate to that revised NOI of $95,858, I get a value of $1,229,000. This is a single purpose, one owner property. It is a federally regulated food processing facility. It is special purpose. I would expect, if anything, that the cap rate at 7.8%, given its special purpose use, is probably low. But that is my submission, $1,229,000. For the record, I was not the agent for the registered owner at the time they filed their information. I have spoken to the registered owner about the information provided. And what I suggested to them was when the information request is sent out by the department, that he attached the financial statements of Santorini Dairies. I can confirm, though it's not in my submission, that Santorini Dairies, since they have purchased the facility, has lost $1.8 million on the subject, operating the subject property.
That's it?
That's
Open
my
to questions. Mr. Penner?
I have no questions.
Richard?
I'm just trying to puzzle out a 1,500 square foot loss of square footage. It looks like there's a mezzanine.
There is an area that is required in this special purpose building that has, I was there this morning inspecting the subject property. There isn't a lot of extra space. There is an area that overlooks the processing floor. That is required because you're not, access to the processing floor is restricted.
Right.
And so I believe that's the, that is the 1,499 square feet that the assessor has imputed a value of $6.98.
And you've decided not to impute any value to that, even though it's used in the operation of the business, which then reduces your net income.
Right.
Okay.
It is required as part of the special purpose building.
Mary?
I have no questions, thank you.
Neither do I. Mr. Penner, if you could make your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As noted, this is property at 612 Dufferin Avenue, owned by Santorini Dairies, Inc. The value in the road for 2020 is $1,481,000. The rest of the property details are shown on page 1 of my brief. Turning to page 2, this property changed hands in 2012. Consideration was $1 and the sworn value $1,398,500. On page 3 are some rental comparisons to support our rent chosen in our income valuation. The range there is $794 to $890. Turning to page 4 is our income valuation workup. We have 13,772 square feet at $780 and the mezzanine area of 1,499 at $698. The overall rate is $7.72 per square foot, giving us a potential rent of $117,885. To that, we've applied a vacancy loss of 6%, expenses of 2%, and used a cap rate of 7.1% to derive our value of $1,481,000. Page 6 is a summary of our cap rates, and the cap rate chosen falls within the 20th to the 80th percentile of the city of Winnipeg. MAA excerpts are found on page 7. Some overhead views of the property are on page 8. And some alternate views on page 9. And street views of the property are on page 10 and 11. We've already touched on the mailer submission. The back of our brief, starting on page 16, is the addenda to our submission. Basically, there's some cap rates, examples of cap rates from the market. We speak about non-recoverable expenses on page 20. We won't get into that at this time. And we talk about IAAO standards on page 21. So based on the evidence, we believe $1,481,000 is a fair value. We ask that the panel confirm it. Thank you.
Questions, Ken?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Penner, on page 1 of your brief,
Yes.
is there 3 buildings or 1 building?
It's one building built in 3 different sections.
You've got number of premises 2. What is the 2 referring to?
The premises are shown on page 4. The first premise is the 13,772, and the second premise represents the mezzanine area.
The 13,772 is the plan area of the building as indicated on page 1?
That's correct.
Did you inspect the building?
No, I have not.
Did I offer you an opportunity to inspect?
I don't think we corresponded.
You didn't see my email?
No.
Maybe you didn't get it. The subject sale history that you show on page 2, my records are showing that the property was sold pursuant to a court order in 2014.
2014?
Is it possible that there was a purchase sale in prior to that? Because you're showing 2012.
Right. We don't have anything registered land titles subsequent to that.
Page 4. So your workup, you've used the $7.80 for better term, the main floor space, 13,772.
Yes.
And I believe that's a business assessment rate, is it not? Is that not correct?
Well, it's a realty rate. It's a rent per square foot. And I'm not really sure what was used for BA. It looks like it must have been the same, according to your evidence.
And And the overall cap rate of 7.1%, which I believe you quote the cap rates on page 6.
Right.
Is that sort of the middle of the?
That would be derived from a model based on the year built, the size of the premise, and the location. So we would be looking at sales of properties of that age, and based on the age and size and location, 7.1 as indicated.
So age, size of the property, and the location,
Correct.
not the purpose of the building.
No.
In your experience, would special purpose buildings receive a higher cap rate?
It's possible. I really can't say.
Those are all my questions.
Carrie?
Yeah, so page 2 of your brief, you've got this sale, and so I'm assuming you're saying it's not arm's length, because you're indicating a sale price of $1 with consideration of $1.
I don't know the circumstances of it, but obviously the consideration was $1, and the parties swore the value to be as indicated there.
Okay, but you don't have any information on it.
No, I don't.
And page 4 is all model driven?
That is correct.
Let me direct.
Sure.
Mr. Leslie, you had indicated this 1,500 square feet of mezzanine.
They call it mezzanine. The person I met with today, they said it was second floor. It was required space for a dairy processing facility. It has a glass window looking down onto the processing floor.
So,
It can't be rented out for any other purpose.
okay, so there's no equipment up there, there is nothing going on up there other
There's a
than-
boardroom.
There's a boardroom?
There's,
Okay.
I believe, 2 washrooms,
Okay.
and there's a lab.
Okay. Thank you, that's all my questions.
Richard?
I'm fine with the city. May I redirect for the moment?
Sure.
Evidence has been given by the city that a sale in 2012 occurred at $1,398,000. Are you unaware of that sale, sir?
I am unaware of it.
Okay, thank you.
You're done?
That's it.
Mr. Penner, you don't supply any comparables for the mezzanine, do you?
Not specifically, no.
Are they usually that close to the same price as the main floor?
Well, it's a model rate, and it appears to be somewhat more than just a storage mezzanine, so it wouldn't be unusual to be close.
But the business assessment rule doesn't pick up that area. Why
I'm
is
not
that?
really sure on that. I see that it notes record number 1, and I'm not really sure if there's a record number 2 representing the other premise. Each premise would have its own calculation, and then the overall ARV would be the sum of the two. And that's not in my evidence, so I don't know if there's a record 2.
Was there a second record that?
Not that I'm aware of.
Does it always say record 1? Record
It says
2, or
on his page 2, it
Yeah, I
has
see it.
record number 1. So I'm left to wonder if there's a record 2 for the other premise, and then the total ARV would be the sum of both.
That's all. Why would it be considered a second premise?
Well, because it has a different rate, different characteristics, so it's all part of the same economic unit, but it's valued somewhat differently because of its characteristics.
So 3 buildings split into 2 premises, 1 story. It's clear as mud.
I can't really comment on the business assessment without having looked at it myself, which I haven't. But typically, we might see, in an industrial strip mall, 8 different premises with 8 different ARVs, each valued separately. But if one owner has 2 or 3 of those units, then it would be the sum of those for the total ARV. And I don't know if that's the case here or not.
In any case, this is what's printed off when you pull it up for that roll number. And that information shows up. That's 15,271 leasable, correct? On your page, your first page.
That's correct, yes.
So this is the information that's in the computer. Maybe you got lucky and lost the page. I've got no further questions. Oh,
Yes,
one
Mr.
more.
Penner, one more question.
Sure.
So you yourself did not inspect this property?
I have.
Okay. So do you have anywhere in your notes when it was last inspected?
I don't have that with me here, so I can't really say.
Okay. Is it the city's policy to inspect the property after it's been sold?
Not necessarily. We would typically send out a sales mailer on sale.
Okay. And just in regards to the appellant's brief, it's got this sale in 2014, and you have no record of it at all?
It doesn't appear that that was registered with land titles, otherwise it would populate in our brief. So it looks like a transaction between the parties.
Thank you. That's all my questions.
That concludes the matter. Thank you very much. The next one up will be 1499. Can we take a minute? It was literally a minute. I got to read you. Call the meeting to order. Swear.
Please state your full name.
Mark Newman?
You swear to give respect to the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Property 1499 Buffalo Place. Mr. Penner, when you are ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the file number is 19-4099. The roll number is 0307-157-4000, 1499 Buffalo Place, and the owner is Pollard Investments Limited. Value in the roll for 2020 is $4,391,000. This property was built between 1968 and 1995. The effective year built, we have it as 1979. I'm not sure if it's on your brief, but we determined the effective year to be 1979. The land area is 147,068 square feet. Plan area 51,755. Gross floor area 60,731. Turning to page 2, the owner has complied with our request for information. No problems there. Turning to page 3, we have some rent comparables to support the rent we chose for our model. They range from $525 to $595 per square foot. Turning to page 4 now, we have the income summary for this property. There's 53,825 square feet at a rate of $594 and 8,470 square feet at a rate of $367. The overall rate is $563 per square foot. From that, we derive the potential rent of $350,806. To that, we applied a vacancy loss of 2.5%, expenses of 2%, and an overall cap rate of 7.5%. We determined the value of $4,391,000. Page 6 is our cap rate table, and the cap rate goes in here at 7.5%, falls within the range of the 20th to the 80th percentile for the city of Winnipeg. Page 7 are the MAA excerpts. Starting on page 8, we have an overhead map of this property. It's located at the corner of Buffalo Place and Otter Street in Fort Garry. There's an overhead satellite view on the bottom of page 8. Some alternate views of the property are on page 9, and page 10 has some street views of the property. Page 11 is the mailer submission given to us by the owner. They note the leasable area at 62,295, and there's one tenant. They indicate that the rent is net, and the rent income is shown there at $363,318. It is noted that the occupant is the same as the owner, so we wouldn't be able to say that that's a market rent, although it is fairly much in line with our model rent. Moving on, we have some research from Colliers. This is all about the Winnipeg industrial market for the fourth quarter of 2017, so just prior to the reference date. If you'll turn to page 16 of my brief, there's an overview of the Winnipeg market there with some very good information. In the top paragraph on the left, they talk about the inventory supply. It remains limited, with Winnipeg's overall vacancy for this quarter dropping to its lowest point within the last 5 years. The next paragraph down, vacancy and absorption. They speak about the southwest sector, which this property is a part of, that it experienced a further reduction to its vacancy rate by decreasing from 0.54% to 0.23%. It also notes that inventory levels in the sector are at an all-time low, with less than 40,000 square feet available in the area at year-end. Opportunities to enter this popular market are extremely limited due to the scarcity of available product. And in the southwest sector, on the right side of the page in the middle, the scarcity of industrial supply has driven the average weighted net asking rental rate to $13.37 per square foot from $11.86 per square foot in the previous half. So there's a lot of positive things in the market affecting this particular property. It's worthwhile to take note specifically what's happening in the southwest, the Fort Garry section. If you turn to page 19, you'll see that they summarize the vacancy rate and that it's fallen from 0.54% to 0.23%, and the net rents, asking net rent, had increased from the prior half. 2017 Q2 11.86 to 13.37 per square foot in the fourth quarter. So that's a bit of a background on the market, particularly in the southwest portion of the city. Capital Commercial Real Estate puts out some information as well, and they note 0.2% vacancy in the southwest portion of the city. That's on page 22. And by Q1 of 18, it had dropped to 0.1%. So virtually no vacancy in this area. On that same page, page 23, they speak that average net rent is $10.50 per square foot net. On page 24 is the addenda information, which I briefly touched on. I'll just speak very briefly to it. The non-recoverable expense sampling is something that we differ on here. Our evidence points to 2% as being sufficient for non-recoverables, whereas Mr. Newman believes it should be 7%. The basis of that difference is we do not consider things like leasing commissions, tenant inducements, free rent or asset management in the calculation of NOI, and we believe that position is supported by case law, looking back on several cases that have been before the municipal board. So it's not that we're not agreeing that there should be a deduction for non-recoverables. We're merely disagreeing in the amount, 2% versus 7%. It's not that we've changed methodology, just we differ on the amount. And that's based on our experience in analyzing market data that comes to us. So based on the evidence presented, we believe $4,391,000 is a fair value. I did want to note that we did review this property before the assessment went out. We modified the model slightly, some of the characteristics of the model. The original value was going out at $5,129,000, and we adjusted that model to come up with the value of $4,391,000. We believe it's a fair reflection of the market, and we believe that this particular sector that this building is in is a very desirable sector. Reduces the risk of if a vacancy did happen, but it wouldn't be very long lasting. So based on the evidence, I ask the panel confirm the value at $4,391,000. Thank you.
Mr. Newman, questions?
Yes. Let's go to page 19 of your brief. And let's start with the last things you said, which was to talk about the southwest sector and how desirable it is. So just so we're clear, Colliers at page 19, in the left-hand column, under the heading Trends, they talk about diminishing vacancy, which you made reference to. You also made reference to the average asking net rent, which is referenced below. But just so we're clear, this Colliers report, when it talks about the southwest quarter of the city, is also talking about development in the RM McDonald, which is as you go further west along McGilvery, you come into the RM McDonald, correct?
I don't.
Okay. Which part don't you know? Whether this is talking about?
Whether it includes the RM at McDonald.
Okay. But you know RM at McDonald is to the west along McGilvery?
Yes.
Okay. And then shortly after you go past Costco out there, you come into the RM at McDonald. All right. Now, the other thing is, a lot of the space that's been developed in this segment of the city is space developed along Kenniston, where you had the Tuxedo Business Park developed by Terracon, and you had the space there, much of which has become office. That is included in this inventory, correct?
Again, I can't speak to that. I don't think.
Do you agree with me that the Tuxedo Business Park space is not purely industrial space, as the subject is?
That could be. My assumption is this is an industrial market report, and that it would be focused on that.
So let's go to page 1 of your brief. Actual years built, 1968, 1995. I've actually never asked the question I'm about to ask you before, but I'm curious. How does the adjustment get made to an effective year? Does the model do it? Is there automatic systems that do it? Or is that an assessor specific task?
I couldn't say. I'm not expert at that at all.
Let me ask it of you this way. You didn't determine the effective year of 1979.
No, I didn't.
Okay. So when you ask the system to generate a brief for you, that's what comes out of the system?
That's correct.
Okay. Land to plan area 2.84, correct?
Yes.
And this is something the department notes on every brief, the land to plan area?
Yes.
And that's sometimes referred to as the land to building ratio?
Yes.
And is it fair to say that in the world of industrial properties, from a good, better, best perspective, the more land relative to the square footage of the building, the better?
Not always. My understanding is for M1 and M2, it's less important than for M3. Sometimes it's actually better use of the land to build additional building space rather than maintain the land area. So it depends.
Okay. But certainly this is below the 3 to 4 ratio that one frequently sees. Agreed?
Yes.
Let's look here to your page 3. So these are your comparables. But before we go there, turn to page 4, which is the value. The value is model generated, correct?
That's correct.
And so the 53,825 square feet, that's the main floor space,
Yes.
and the model says that should rent at $5.94 a square foot.
Right.
The 8,470 square feet, that's the mezzanine space, and the model says that should rent for $3.67 a square foot.
Correct.
So now we come back to page 3. These are the comparables which the model also generated.
These are comparables in the system based on our mailing responses.
But the model generated them. You didn't select them, the model selected them.
Well, there is a selection process. I would be looking for rents for premises that are larger, similar in size, in age and use, if wherever possible. So it's not just the first 5 that come up in the model. We make a query based on what we're trying to compare to.
And what you're trying to compare to is the rent generated by the model.
Yeah, well, for a premise of in around 53,000 square feet. So you can see the comps range from 30,000 up to, in this case, 48,000.
Okay. So the model says the main floor space should rent for $5.94 a square foot.
Yes.
Let's look at the comps. So 1455 Mountain, which is both the second and the fourth comp. That's the same space, that's the same lease, isn't it?
No.
That's the Canada Goose lease, isn't
There's
it?
2 separate premises there.
But it's Canada Goose, isn't
Yes,
it?
yes, it is.
It's the occupant in both spaces.
Yes.
And the public announcements in relation to this space described Canada Goose as taking in excess of 94,000 square feet.
Right.
But same start date, same rent, all right, but that's Canada Goose.
Yes.
Do you know how much money the landlord gave the tenant?
I don't.
Okay. 1750 Inkster Boulevard, that is a very large building of over 182,000 square feet, correct?
That could be.
Do you know?
Not offhand.
Okay. Do you know who this tenant is?
I do.
Who's that?
Coal and Frisch.
Kohl.
Yep.
And then 154 Paramount, 30,000 square feet, $5.50. Do you know who the tenant is there?
Yes.
Acrolon Plastics.
That doesn't jive with what I have.
What do you have?
Novus.
Okay. And then 1266 Fife. Who's the tenant there?
Westerkirk Gaspar.
Yeah, Gaspard.
Gaspar.
And do you know that 1266 Fife used to be the Victoria Leather premises? You may not remember
I
Victoria
didn't
Leather.
know that.
Not that old.
Well, all right. So, and of course, Mr. Penner, you're familiar with the concept of economies of scale, that the smaller the space, typically the higher the unit rate.
Yes.
And all of these units are smaller than the subject.
Well, they're certainly within the ballpark.
Well, 154 Paramount, the subject is twice
Yeah,
as big.
that one is considerably smaller.
And the other ones, 1266 Fife, for example, is 33% smaller. 62,000 square.
Oh, well, yeah, if I was looking more at the 53,000 plan area, the mezz is kind of a different valuation.
All of these comparables are in Inkster Industrial Park.
Yes, well, I look for manufacturing, light manufacturing premises,
Right.
so that's where I found size.
Okay.
And
So let's go to page 4. So the plan area of this building is just over 51,000 square feet, correct?
yes,
And so that means you're going to have a roof approximating 51,000 square feet?
yes,
You talked earlier about the non-recoverables, and you talked about the fact that there's a difference of opinion as to what the amount should be, 2% as opposed to 7%, and you indicated that was because the city does not include leasing commissions, TIs, asset management, and you mentioned that there's case law that supports that.
yes,
All right. But the city would include roof replacement, correct?
structural repairs, yes,
Yes. And roof replacement would be a structural repair?
yes,
Yes. So we've got a roof here that's over 51,000 square feet. $12 a square foot, does that seem like a reasonable amount to you for a replacement of a roof?
I couldn't say.
Okay. So accepting $12 just for the moment, that would turn into $621,000. If I amortize that over 25 years, the life of the roof, that's $24,842. The 2% allowance is $6,841. I won't ask you if you think that's enough. But there would be other non-recoverable expenses in addition to the roof. There'd be parking lot replacements. There'd be what I'll call normal structural on the building. There'd be legal, there'd be audit. Those are all types of things that fall within non-recoverable. Agreed?
Yes.
Those are my questions. Thank you.
Carrie, questions?
Yes. Did you inspect the property?
I have no,
Do you know the last time it was inspected?
not offhand.
And you stated earlier, Mr. Penner, when you were giving evidence that you modified the brief?
Yes,
You had it at $5 million and something,
that's correct.
correct?
Yeah.
What exactly did you modify?
The rent. The rent had been indicated at $692 for the 53,000 and $428 for the mezz. And by modifying the model, we reduced it to $594 and $367 respectively.
Okay. And that was because of your rent comparables on page 3?
Right.
You agree?
Yes.
That's all my questions. Thanks.
Richard,
I'm fine, thank you.
on with your presentation, Mr. Newman.
Can I just ask one question arising?
Sure you can.
Mr. Penner, my impression of what you said earlier, because you were asked a question about whether the brief was modified, my impression of what you said earlier was that the original assessment, as it came out, was modified to the $4,391,000.
Right.
The question you were asked about whether you modified the brief. The brief didn't get modified, correct?
Was that the question? Yeah, not the brief, the value. So this was done I'm sorry, I misunderstood the question. Before our assessments go out, we have a review process where we look at the big increases or the big decreases, and we try and determine what's going on with those properties. In this case, we looked at this one and determined that we thought the value was a bit high and that the rents were a bit high, and we made our adjustment that way. So not the brief. but the assessment.
And just so I'm clear, were you specifically involved in that, or was it somebody else in the department?
It was within the department,
But not you?
not in this case.
Right. Okay. And so similarly, the reason for the adjustment was because the rents were changed, they were decreased, but that decrease had nothing to do with this set of comparables, correct?
Well, again, on review, we would be looking at comparable rents to see if it was supported or not. So those comps would have been looked at.
Well,
As
these
a-
rents could have been within the group of comps that were looked at, but you didn't do it, so you don't know.
I didn't do this one, but that would be the process. Somebody would have been looking for similar size and use and made a judgment call.
All right. Thank you. On I go.
On you go.
So I raised three issues: the rental rate, the non-recoverable expenses, and the capitalization rate. Go to the first page of my brief, and you'll see under the heading rent in the lower half of the page a variety of alternate rents. Some very close by on Buffalo for smaller spaces admittedly and a little bit dated, in the range of $475 to $550 a square foot. Some getting much larger, 550 Oak Point, 62,000 square feet. That's the West Trans, one word, West Trans transmission facility at $5.39. 1051 King Edward, which is the former Jostens premises, similar size, 62,000 square feet at $550. 165 Cordite, a little bit smaller, Special Tech Laser at $4.60. And then the ones I consider the most comparable, 1169 Sherwin Road, which is a premises occupied by Macmore Industries, which is involved in the distribution and manufacture of industrial safety and rigging equipment. It has, and I've been in it, so I'm quite familiar with it. It has both a main and second floor office component at the front of the building. I actually did this building in appeal with Stephen Lobenstein early in October. It has a main floor and second floor office component at the front, and then you go into the rear, and you've got both manufacturing, storage, and distribution. This is a lease for 50,282 square feet, done in January of 2018, right before the reference date, at $5.35 a square foot, and then 1720 Dublin, which I believe to be the UPS distribution center, September of 17 at $5.50 a square foot. And based on these comparables, I've selected a rate of $5.35 a square foot. I believe that these comparables, certainly a couple of them, Oak Point and King Edward, are much similar in size to the subject. Sherwin is a little bit smaller overall, but it does have office both on a main floor level and on a mezzanine level at the front of the building, and it's a lease that's very close in time to the reference date. So I think that and the UPS lease on Dublin are both valid comparables. So as I say, ultimately I've picked $5.35 a square foot. The assessor's rents, I'll simply make the observation, they are all located in the Inkster Industrial Park area. He indicated he was looking for large manufacturing space, and that's where it seemed to be found. I seem to be able to find some in some other areas, so I'll just leave that with you and just mention again finally the economies of scale. A number of the assessor's comps are smaller, and one of them, actually two of them, 1455 Mountain, are the same transaction. It's the lease to Canada Goose. A lot of money went into that building to outfit it, to allow Canada Goose to manufacture their now world-famous winter jackets in that facility. So then we have the issue of the non-recoverables. I know that every single one of you panel members has heard this more than once. Mr. Penner hasn't heard it from me before.
Well, maybe he'd love to. Would you like to hear it, Mr. Penner?
I don't need to hear it,
Oh.
Mr. Chairman.
Well, we're just asking.
But thank you.
He can read all about it.
Yes,
But-
I'll read it tonight.
But I just want to say in a general sense that I acknowledge there are differences between the department and appellants. And the difference really revolves around the quantum, as Mr. Penner has, I think, appropriately recognized. And I use the example of the roof, and the roof is an especially apt example in the context of a building of this size, single story. It's got a very, very large footprint, obviously. It turns into a lot of money to replace this roof, which will happen eventually. It turns into, at $12, which many property managers have told me is a reasonable rate, turns into $621,000. If you amortize that over 25 years, which theoretically is the economic life of a roof, that's $24,842. The assessor's 2% is $6,841. It's not nearly enough for the roof, let alone for anything else. And of course, you're going to have other items in the form of parking, surface replacements. You're going to have what I'll call normal structural repair on the building. You're going to have legal, you're going to have audit, you're going to have that whole spectrum of items. And for all those reasons, the 2% allowance is not enough, and accordingly I'm requesting a 7% allowance. Then on the capitalization rate, the assessors use 7.5%. I'm at 7.75%. The difference between us really is my perspective on the building and primarily its land-to-building ratio. This building has a 2.84 land-to-building ratio. That's not enough for a building of this size. A building of this size needs more, and because of that, I've made a slight adjustment to the capitalization rate to bring it to 7.75%, which is actually the just below the 80th percentile on the assessor's capitalization rate chart. If we go into my brief before tab 1, there are 3 pages before tab 1. So page number 1 in the lower right-hand corner. So go to tab 1 and then come back towards the front from tab 1, 3 pages. So there's the calculation of the assessment. The assessors explain that. There's my calculation of value using $5.35 a square foot. Same vacancy, same shortfall. Non-recoverables total 5% and 2% for 7%, and the 7.75% capitalization rate generates a value of $3,823,000. The next page, I put it there only because, as I said, I'd never asked the question before, but I was curious about how the system adjusts the effective age. So what this tells you is when each part of the building was built, and what it tells you is if you look down at the bottom, that's the metal frame section of the building that was added in 1995, 11,812 square feet, and this is what is driving the change in effective age, because generally speaking, the building is a 1968 building, and I observed that parts of the ceiling height are 20 feet, the 33,000 portion. You've got another portion at 11 feet, and that's going to be the office portion at the front, and then you've got the newest portion at 22 feet. 22 feet in the world of industrial buildings is not bad, but it's not best. It's not the highest quality you can get. And then I have some additional cap rate information, including some Altus information, which I don't need to address. So at the end of the day, you've got 3 decisions to make. What's the rent? The assessor's at a blended rate of $5.63, driven substantially by the $5.94 for the main floor. $5.94, as I said to you, is too high. Only one of his comparables is that high. The rest of his comparables are lower, and I suggest that my comparables are better. The capitalization rate you've heard me on, the 5% you've heard me on. that is my submission, subject to your questions.
Mr. Fair, questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Newman, your rent comps, are these all manufacturing facilities?
Let's work backwards. 1720 Dublin is a distribution center for UPS, so it's not manufacturing. 1169 Sherwin, like the subject, is a combination of office, manufacturing, and storage for distribution purposes of the product that's made there. And there is manufacturing happening there. I've been in the space. Cordite is manufacturing. They do laser tech. They do, Jostens was a manufacturing facility in terms of photographs. West Trans, I'm not positive whether that is storage and distribution only or whether they do some manufacturing there, and then the other ones are all smaller.
1050 King Edward was Jostens?
Yes. It's now the Johnson Group.
Okay. Do you have a more current lease on that? I see that one began in May of 13 and was 1 year.
I don't.
So that more or less represents the 2013-14 grant?
Yes.
That's all my questions.
Richard?
Have you inspected the building?
I have not,
You haven't been inside?
which is unusual. But I have had extensive discussions in terms of what's there, and I can describe to you what's there in terms of how the facility is utilized if you wish.
What do they do in this?
So it's part of Pollard, as you heard, and they have printing presses. They have 6 printing presses in this building. They have some office space in this building. They have a lunchroom for staff, and they also have storage area located at the back of the building that is away from Buffalo Place.
And what are they printing?
They're printing lottery tickets. That's what Pollard, that's the business
Yeah.
that Pollard is in.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if they had to undergo extensive renovation for security purposes to protect the product?
Well, and I think you may have asked me that question in the context of 140 Otter.
Right.
And yes, they do have security there. Indeed, I had a chat with the Director of Treasury about it, and he said, we could have security take you through the space. So I would be accompanied as I went through the space. They are concerned, obviously, about the integrity of the lottery tickets and the numbering and the printing, and they don't want people scamming the lottery systems.
Or robbing the place.
Or robbing the place.
Of course. Okay. Now I look at your photo, I look at the photo on page 9 of the city's brief, just because it seems to be helpful in looking at the building. Are you there?
Yes.
The bottom photo, well, both photos, the light gray areas
Yes.
look like fairly new roof relative to the rest of the roof.
So I believe the light gray area is the 11,000 square foot addition that I referenced on that page. That's the metal portion of the building that was added.
And the balance would be the original as you presented on
That's correct.
in your brief.
Yes.
I won't go to the page number, but yeah, you did in 1964 and 68 or something like that.
Yes.
Okay. Now, I tried to find detailed information on expenses, and it's not forthcoming in either of the briefs. Do you know what kind of money they're spending on repair and maintenance on this building in a year?
I don't. And of course, the problem with an owner-occupied building is the need to make a distinction between repair and maintenance for what I'll call the business operation as opposed to repair and maintenance of the building, of the real estate. And those are different, but I don't know the answer to your question.
And I asked because you make much of 51,000 square feet at $12 a foot,
Right.
and the non-recoverable nature of that.
Yes.
It might not be necessary, is that not true, if they keep the building on a regular basis?
So what I'm going to say to you is you can do all the repair you want on a tar and gravel roof. Eventually, you can't repair anymore. The water gets in, the felt gets wet, it starts to expand, it loses its properties to keep the building waterproof. and eventually you do have to replace the roofs. And that's why I amortize it
Yeah.
over the economic life or the lifespan of the roof.
I understood that part of your presentation. Good. Thanks. No further questions.
I asked you already, right?
I did not.
I did not. Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Newman, your comparables that you brought forward, did you have a chance to visit those, inspect?
So I have been in 1169 Sherwin. That's the Mackmore space. And that matter was before the board with Assessor Lobenstein in early October. And so I was in that building with him as part of that one. I have been in 1455 Buffalo Place over the years. I have not been in the rest.
Okay. So the two that you were in, how did they compare condition-wise? You didn't inspect Buffalo, though.
I did not, that's correct.
Okay. And more than half of the square footage of this property is 1968.
I'd say actually about 80%.
Yeah. Was it built by the owners back then?
No.
Do you know what its life was previous to this?
What went on
What was
there?
going on?
I don't know.
Thank you. That's all my questions.
When you calculated your rent, did you, any of the other spaces that you were using for comparables have that mezzanine space?
So 1169 Sherwin, which I said to you earlier, is what I consider to be the strongest comparable. That rent is the single rent in place under that lease. And as I said to you, there is both main floor and second floor office space that's associated with that. But there's no distinction made in the rental rate between the office portion, first or second floor, and the back of the house, so to speak. And in my experience, frankly, these leases don't make a distinction between mezzanine space and the rest of the space, and I think, frankly, that's why it's difficult for any of us to find comparables for mezzanine space, because they don't lease by themselves.
And you used basically the exact same rate as that one?
Yeah.
I've got no further questions. Any of the information, Mr. Fenn?
No, I'm fine.
Anything?
I'm good. No,
You're
I'm
good?
good.
Thank you very much. You have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
We're going to do that last one now. Are you going to set it off? We'll call the meeting back to order. Want to swear Mr. Mito in? Mr. Mito?
I can't stand, I'm really sore. That's it.
Okay, please say your full name.
Rocky Newton.
You affirm the evidence about to present the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Benner, when you are ready, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is file number 19-1312. The roll number is 14053420000. The address 1213 Fife Street. This is a property owned by Forum Enterprises Limited. The value in the roll for 2020 is $349,000. We have a preliminary issue here. The assessor is requesting that the burden of proof be placed on the applicant for non-cooperation. Section 53(3)(b) of the MAA, and if a reduction in assessment is ordered, that it follows Section 54(3.2) of the MAA. If you turn to page 2, the information sent to us was sent to us on July 11th, 2018. This information was due on May the 3rd, 2018. So essentially, it's 2 months late, and that is the basis of the penalty request.
Questions, Mr. Newton?
Okay, so this, you're saying, was late, and was there a mailer sent, registered mail sent?
No, there wasn't, I don't believe. Or there might have been, I don't have it here in my hands.
Okay, you don't, okay. And so the specific infraction citing the act would be what?
Late submission.
And what was the due date?
May the 3rd, 2018.
Where does it say that?
Page 11, top right corner.
Because I've heard, I don't know exactly the right way to ask this question, but I've heard people say that you don't even look at them until much later. Is that correct?
I couldn't say.
When do they start looking at the mailers, do you know?
I don't know.
Did they start on May 4th?
I don't know.
When was the roll prepared? When did you begin preparing the roll?
I don't know the exact date.
When was the roll released?
The 2020 roll?
Yes.
In June, early June of 1999.
2019. So when did you at any point start working on the 2020 roll?
Personally,
Yes.
I have my part in the preparation.
When did that start?
I can't recall.
Those are my questions.
Richard, questions?
So I understand you send a mailer out to the appellant, to the owner,
Yes.
and if they don't reply within what time frame, do they get a notice to, I've seen letters from the department reminding them to get their filings.
I'm not sure of the exact date, but
Rough, what time period? 2 weeks, a month, 2 months? Does that letter typically go out?
typically it would go out in sometime in May via registered if we hadn't received anything.
So the mailer would go out, or the request would go out in April.
The initial request go
Yeah.
out in April.
And then if there was a mailer, it would typically go out in April, May, and then a follow-up letter in April, May.
It would go out in late May.
Late May?
If there was a registered letter. It would go out in May
Yeah.
and be due towards the middle of June.
Yeah, I think I've seen June 30th or something, June 15th, 30th on some of the
Yeah.
submissions that we've
Yeah.
seen. Okay, that helps me with the time frame that you typically work with. So in this case, it doesn't appear the mailer was sent out. They simply sent out
I'm
filing.
not sure. I haven't included that in my evidence. Eventually, we did get information back, only it was 2 months
Yeah,
past the due date.
okay. So help me understand the process just a little bit further then, and it kind of builds on what Mr. Nicol was asking you. So you would typically, I mean, I can imagine you're inundated with paper during that period of time, and all of these files are sitting there waiting to be opened and worked on. So in this particular case, you don't have a registered date as to when the file was opened anywhere in your evidence?
It's not in my evidence.
But typically you would have that
If we
in a
didn't-
file somewhere.
yeah, if we didn't receive a submission, and I don't know if that was sent out in this case or not, but I only included the original mailer because we did actually receive the original mailer back.
Okay, and just help me a little bit with the process. Because what I'm trying to get at is, my understanding of business practices, especially with something like this, is, let's say you didn't open this file, or somebody didn't open this file until August 4th. There would typically be a notation somewhere in the file that would say, opened on August 4th. It might not reflect that exactly, but it would say something about August 4th.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that process.
Oh.
I'm not involved in that.
You don't open files.
I'm not involved in that particular part of the work.
Okay. Okay. So you don't know if that process is confirmed then, that a file would have a notation as to when it was opened?
Yeah, I would say.
So that would be useful in a non-qual file for us in making our decisions, as you can appreciate.
Sure.
Okay. Now I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Gary?
Would you happen to know, Mr. Penner, how many commercial properties you're dealing with in terms of mailers every year? Would you say more than 1,000?
Yes.
More than 5,000?
Again, I couldn't say.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Penner, none of the information that was sent would have been used in this anyway, right? Because you use a model?
The information would be used to compile the model.
Right. That's not the question I asked you. The information that was
In this
in this
particular
particular would not have been used to compile this.
to compile this specific.
Correct.
No.
The model, this information goes into the modelers in May, and they continue to input till what month? September, October?
I don't.
But do you know when they come in, the modelers? The ones that are doing the inputting?
Well, I imagine they're working on them from day one,
Yeah.
as soon as the first mailers come in, and continue compiling the model until they're done.
A lot of summer students hired for that, for the inputting?
I don't.
This information would have ended up in the model, would it not?
Yes.
Because even though it came in July,
Well,
it still would have ended up in the model.
I don't know that. The information, had it been received on time, certainly would have been part of the model. I don't know if there's a cutoff per se where they stop adding new data. I don't know what that time
That would be helpful if they brought that information next time they want to make this claim. On with your presentation.
Well, I think that's part of the presentation. They've heard many, many times that they don't start using it till the fall, and a few days isn't going to hurt anyone, and wasn't a problem. Some assessors make that statement and say that they've been told to ask for the penalty, some don't. I can't control that. Here's the real issue, though. There's no offense at all. The assessor's supposed to provide us with an offense. The Act, Municipal Assessment Act, says deferral can be granted. And I'd asked earlier if you do have a copy of the Act, may I see it, and I can read from it, or you can look at it yourself.
Page 63.
Yeah, okay. No, that's not it. That's attendance money. That's what I'm asking later for.
Unless it's a different book.
Under the we wanted Section 16.2 of the Act, where a person, including a Crown agency or Crown corporation, receives a written request from an assessor under subsection 1, the person shall, within 21 days of receiving their request, provide information or documentation to the extent whether the request relates. So the penalty is based on 21 days from receiving the request. There's been no proof that the request was received. That's when the clock starts ticking. It's not the assessor's arbitrary date of May, nor on the second one when it goes out registered, is it the arbitrary date in June. It's 21 days from receipt. So if you're going to ask for a penalty under the Manitoba law, you've got to meet the standards of the law. Now, the other part of that, Section 53(3)B says to comply with a request for information and documentation under Section 16. That's on page 64. So it goes back to the 21 days. No 21 days proven, it can't be a penalty.
Question, Mr. Penner?
Yeah, Mr. Neufeld, do you know when the owner received this request?
No, he was sick, he was ill, so I don't know. I only spoke to him after.
So you don't know when he received it?
No.
No further questions.
Richard?
Just let me look at one thing if you want to move over to Carrie for a moment.
Carrie?
No questions.
Back to you, Richard, when you're ready.
No, I'm fine, no questions.
I've got no question. If you could leave the room for a minute, so we can make our, call the meeting back to order. And on this one, Mr. Fenner, we're going to deny his request. If you go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. File number and roll number have already been read out, so I won't do that again. Value in the roll for 2020 is $349,000. This property building was built in 1964. The land area is 15,737 square feet. The plan area 4,356 square feet. The land to plan area is 3.61. This is in the Eastern Industrial Park, and the zoning is N2 manufacturing. Turning to page 3, we have some rent comparables ranging from $440 to $1171 per square foot. Turning to page 4, we have the income valuation workup. We have 4,356 square feet at $505 per square foot for a potential rent $21,998. To that, we've applied vacancy of 3.5%, expenses at 2%, and we've used a cap rate of 5.8% to derive the value of $349,000. Just a point to note, there has been no actual vacancy in this property since at least 2002. Coming to page 6, we have our cap rate table. 5.8 is below the range of the 20th to the 80th percentile. Falls within the overall range of 5.5 to 9.8% for the city as a whole. On page 8, we have an overhead view, a map, and overhead satellite view of this property. Page 9, we have some alternative views of the property. It's at the corner of Fife and Huron Avenue. And some street views are shown on page 10.
We're going to just tone it down a little bit.
Pardon me?
We're just going to get them to tone it down next door a little bit.
Okay.
Seems to be having a Christmas party.
Yeah. Simple history.
You can carry on now. Still haven't quite. Go ahead, Mr.
Shall I carry on,
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman? Oh, thank you. So starting on page 11, we have the mailer that was sent to us showing rent income and the expenses. Scroll down page 11. On page 13, we see the tenant in place is Trevor's Touch-Ups. As I've said earlier, that they have been the tenant in this premise since 2002. Page 15 is our addenda information, which we've been over. So based on the evidence presented, I ask that the panel confirm the value of $349,000. Thank you.
Question, Mr. Neufeld?
Page 4, was this valuation all done by the model?
Yes, it's an auto value.
Okay. And your comparables, page 3, who chose those?
I selected those.
Okay, now your comparables show an extremely wide range, so I'm wondering how you got to support 505 with this range of 440 to 1171.
Well, 505 falls well within that range of comps, so we believe that it provides support.
Are any of these body shops?
No, I don't believe so.
On your page 6, which row would the capitalization rate come from?
The city Winnipeg range from 5.5 to 9.8.
Yeah, which row?
Oh, well, it's not any particular row. They're all the same.
Well, I mean, is it industrial, retail?
Oh, it's industrial.
Industrial.
Yes.
I just had a colleague of yours in the room next door with body shops tell me that he thought they were retail. So one of you must be improperly informed.
Well, I'm in the industrial section, and this is a property.
And he's in the retail section. And he's got body shops, so I'm just wondering, he said you don't actually
The
don't have
property
a place
is
for
code
it.
is industrial.
Oh, manufacturing light, okay. So you've coded the auto body shop and then it's manufacturing light, and that puts it in, okay. Now, on that basis, this rate is below your 20th percentile.
Yes.
Is that suggesting that it's a really, really good investment opportunity?
No, what we do to determine a cap rate on a building like this is look at the size of it. It's a fairly small building. Doesn't pose a whole lot of risk in terms of vacancy. That's where the cap rate. I mean, these properties, they're not ideal investments, but they do trade in the market. And based on that analysis, 5.8 was indicated.
Have you inspected the site?
I drove by it. I haven't been inside it
And when did you drive by?
last week.
Was the road finished?
The road is finished.
On page 18, just double checking here that these rates you supplied, it says they are not meant to be comparable specific to the subject property. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And as a matter of fact, you've probably heard it being stated before that within the industrial, that 90 Park Lane has been claimed to be sold to an end user, not as an industrial investment.
That's fair.
Okay. And 1100 Waverly, I only have one, my rebuttals here. I don't want to put you at a disadvantage and ask you questions, but 1100 Waverly, isn't it a retail facility, or have you been out and looked at it lately?
At the time of the sale, it was categorized by Colliers as the largest industrial asset transaction of the year.
Can you name one industrial user in the park?
No, I'm not familiar with that property, the specifics of the tenants.
And you're aware that Colliers had notified the city of Winnipeg to avoid using this in cap rate. As a matter of fact, I'll read you the exact words. We expressly prohibit use of this data for the creation of capitalization rates or rates of return, as this data was not created for that purpose, nor was it produced for any sale or at the time of any sale. Were you aware of that statement?
No.
Those are my questions.
Carrie.
I have no questions. Thank you.
Richard.
I've heard evidence, I don't think from you, but from other city assessors, that you have a range of values for the cap establishment. So, just for argument's sake, I think 1973 is a threshold year. Up to 73, a building is capped at some percentage. I think 1946 was maybe another year. Prior to 46, they were given another value. Do you have that information with you?
I don't.
You don't know that information?
I know that there's a stratification,
Right.
and based on a range of age and size and market region, a cap rate would be determined.
But age does have some bearing on that, because
Yes.
that speaks to condition, possibly.
Yes.
Yeah. What about the location of this particular building? Can you tell us whether it's deemed a good location? We hear lots about the southwest quadrant of the city.
Oh, this is an industrial park, Inkster Industrial Park. It's a short drive to Inkster itself, which is a good access road. So location seems fine. Nothing jumps out. Inkster Industrial Park is a very established industrial park, so it should be considered a reasonable location.
And you can't remember the rate that you would establish for properties prior to 73 or post 73?
Yeah, I don't know where the stratification happens, but this one is 1964, so it would fall in over range. So we look at similar properties and what they sold for and what those cap rates were.
Okay, no further questions.
On with your report, Mr. Neufeld.
So you've seen the actual income from the site, and that's listed on page 4. Their claim is 30,000 gross rent and 13,600 as NOI after all expenses. So what we were trying to do is look at this actual rental and do a bit of working backwards and adding in only the vacancy and shortfall, which of course is not in the workup. So that's really what this number represents on page 1, is living with this number and then adding back in the shortfall and vacancy. We come up to 440 a square foot, and there are, factoring the 19,182, when you factor in the non-recoverables, that number is 16,000 or so. And then with the reserve, that brings us right down to what the owner has put in. To support that rent, for a resulting rent of 440, we have a number of rents. I'm sorry, my brain is out of order. Page 7, at the bottom of page 7, there are a number of auto body rents in better parts of town. Now, the first one at 1985 Main is not 731. It is 489. The person who wrote that wasn't aware that the property taxes are paid by the owner, so that is 489. On Wall, another older body shop, a bit of a dated rent. This is a Mako at 475. There's a number of Boyd rents in here that are higher, between $6 that go as high as $9. Those are superior shops, superior locations. Looking at industrial rents on page 6, at the top of page 6 are a number of small industrial sites in West End, downtown, Inkster, and St. James. They range from a low of $3.49 to a high of $6. Where it's marked on the side, COW, those were sourced from what the city of Winnipeg provided. They support the rent of $440. And on page 5 are larger sales, which we are not applying to this site. So the paid rent is $440. It's been in place for some time. It's got I want to say, kind of a strange location. It's on the east side of Fife. Inkster Industrial is the west side of Fife. The general zoning in Inkster Industrial is actually MP2, so this is a bit outside of Inkster Industrial as M2. The neighboring land uses are beginning to change, and on my last trip out there were a number of projects underway or being considered for multifamily in this particular area, which is the east side of Fife, between Fife and McPhillips, and the road was just being upgraded. There were, like I said, there were a few new multifamily sites being worked on in the area. And the danger there, of course, is that auto body shops don't tend to last in areas where there's residential dwellers. Now, the existing owner can continue his usage for as long as he is open, but the minute he loses, you need a new occupancy permit, then you lose it, and you lose it for good. And I have a very funny story to tell because it involves one of our counselors. My partner and I were working on a property on Taché, an old body shop, just like this, just run down. The neighbor who lived right across the street was the then city councilor, who has now gone on to Ottawa. And we got a new tenant in there the day before the legal non-conforming use expired. And it was clear it wasn't going to stay that way, but that's the nature of planning. The reason we bring this up is because it's a risky proposition. It speaks to the types of uses that won't be approved in the future. So if you're pinning your hope on a great return on your investment, forget about it. It's not a good one. the ways that one could potentially look at this is you could look at the land value, but this isn't going to be redeveloped for multifamily. And you could look at alternative uses, maybe something a little nicer, but that requires a capital input. And that's likely with the highest and best use would be someone buying it, converting it to a site that would appeal to both the residential users and still be allowed in the existing permit planning area. So our number, incidentally, the shortfall would be incorrect because it was calculated on the basis of a utility load that was generated by the estimates that the city puts out. This place doesn't have air conditioning, so it would nowhere near be this high. So I just changed that rate to the city shortfall rate at 375, reducing my shortfall to 1127, and my NOI increased to 11824. Same cap rate comes to 137,000 as value. This is a first-time customer of ours. I did go out and look at the site, and it's nothing. It's just an old rundown auto body repair shop in a bad location. We do have some cap rates that are probably the type I would be looking at on this page 35. We have about halfway down the page, 51 Akins. This is a manufacturer in an area in the north end. This is an 11% cap, and it was basically the property was offered for sale as an investment, and which meant that you would set the cap rate by the purchase price. It ended up being 11%. August of 14. 35 Winfield, which is Brookside area. That's a manufacturing site, 9.48%. And lastly, 1375 Richard, which is our 2 rows of small industrial users, which are mostly automotive related. One of the users is Color Tint, who work on cars, and that was at 8.75. So I think the person who wrote this up had a sense of humor, and he's using 8.6% because we know how much Mr. Penner loves that 8.6%. And sometimes we just do things for fun. Probably 875. Now, my last comment to make on this is not an investment sale. To try to find a nice way of putting rents and caps on this and saying to the market is going to buy it for that just isn't realistic. It's going to sell to an end user. My guess for something like this, we were just looking at some properties next door, is probably $50 to $60 a foot. With what it would sell for in the market. It's not a cap rate. It wouldn't indicate a cap rate because it's not an investment sale. So roughly at a midpoint range of about $55, that would be $239,580, rounded to $240,000. We're having a harder and harder time this year with trying to reconcile these small sites that don't really fit into the investment model at all, and yet capitalization rates are placed on it. In order to come reasonably close to what they would sell for in direct comparison, the push on the cap rate is incredible, and it makes it really the application of a cap rate to be, in the case of the assessor, to be completely unusable and unrealistic, and in the case of our side, that doesn't reflect the direct comparison approach, which is how this is going to sell. So my reconciliation is on the income approach in the neighborhood of $137,000, on a direct comparison of $240,000. That is my presentation.
Mr. Penner.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So just so your opinion of value here is 240 or is it 137?
Well, we're governed by the Municipal Assessment Act and concepts of equity. So the basis of this would be on the basis of jurisdictional exception, which an appraiser could claim. I'd have to say $137,000. If you ask me as an accredited appraiser, I would say 240. And it depends on an appraisal is an answer to a question, and the question I'm being asked here is, what is the assessed value? Got to be $137,000. If you ask me what the market value is, I'd say 240. In this case, they're not the same. that's where we get reconciliations on these.
So the market value, you're suggesting is 240,000?
That's if I were to look at it on that basis, that would be my estimate. And what we've been failing to do is we actually have some bulk sales from the Johnson report that we had. We were thinking of entering into evidence because we can't continue on and say 5.8% caps are real in the world, and at the same time it makes all of us look unsupported. That's all I can offer you. I'm looking at a bunch here: $50, $44, $39, $44, $63, $55. These are all small-sized buildings like this. $46. Non-investment grade, $55, $40.
I guess my question is, are you asking the panel to put it to 240, or are you asking the panel to put it to 137?
I'm asking the panel to put it to 137, but I'm also saying that that wouldn't be supported in the market. That's supported by the legislation and jurisdictional exception.
Okay, so just looking at your income approach, your non-recoverables listed there are 27% of the EGI. Is that correct?
Well, that's correct, and this is a gross building, so we've been working on this a fair amount to try to come up with a way of doing this on gross buildings. And with gross buildings, we're tending to look at the 13,666 and doing a bit of working backwards to show what the net really is, and taking into account these recoverables. This is just a placeholder for that recoverable.
That's all my questions, Mr. Chairman.
Gary?
Did you say you inspected this property?
Yeah, I didn't do a deep inspection. I just looked at all the properties in the site and wandered about for a while because I couldn't drive on Fife because it was under construction. So I drove the back lanes, and I was looking for the owner's building, and I got lost a couple times and I wandered through it. So yes, that was my inspection.
But were you inside the building?
Yes, I wandered in and out.
Okay, what's the condition?
Basic fare, nothing special.
Thank you, that's all my questions.
Expenses are more than half.
Yeah, well, it's a gross building. Actually, I think there was one expense we didn't end up applying, and let me tell you what that is. We're getting better in this, you know. We didn't apply the miscellaneous because it wasn't specified. $1,960. That's the number I was looking for.
Oh, you did take it off already?
Yeah, we took off the 1960 because I'm just doing my working back number here.
No, you're just about 50%.
Yeah, but that's because taxes are in there, and they're $5,300. And then there's another 826 we took off, and I'm just trying to figure out what we took off out of here. Obviously not utilities. Cable, satellite TV. Yeah, that's $250. And I'm left with 576 that we took off, which would be marketing because it's for rent. It's leased up. So that was off. I'm still 296 short. Because basically what we put on it for rent was $19,182 minus $2,730 for non-recoverables. So we applied $16,452. And the statement has 13,666. So we are 2786 that we took off. And the 1960, the 250, 280, and still $296 I've accounted for that we took off, not added. But I'm fine with any exercise if you want to read this and say some of these expenses are high. That's fair ball. Definitely utilities and taxes. Oh, I know where the rest came from. Property management, kind of on the high side. Not on a flat basis, because on a flat basis you're looking at least $400 a month or $4,800. But this is part of a portfolio of 3 buildings in a row. So that is on the high side. That's where the rest of the money you adjusted downwards came from.
And then you brought the vacancy up to 6.9.
And that's from Johnson for industrial. And
And
then,
do any of the Johnson report buildings come in that 5,000 square foot range?
wait a sec. Just want to total building. There we go. Now I'm just looking at Inkster. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4.
What are they showing as vacancies?
Well, they
He doesn't do a breakdown?
on those small ones, they're not listing anything as vacant because they're single tenant.
So I mean,
No, but there's no multi-tenants of that size. A vacancy risk is still required.
I know, but 6.9.
Well,
When industrials are not showing any kind of vacancy rate.
no, well, we're dealing with applying a rate of something.
Yeah, I
And
understand that part, but
so what we've got is the investment inventory vacancy by district. Inkster is 6.6, overall is 7.2. That's what we're dealing with. But some districts are so small, like Exchange, they're at 0 because their inventory is low. Murray Park is 0 because it's owner occupied and its inventory is low. Transcona is 22%. I would say that I think the vacancy is fair because even though there's one tenant, one building, and it's not empty, but if it does go empty, it could be empty 1 month, and then all of a sudden it's an 8.5% vacancy for just 1 month being empty. 2 months we're at 17%, and that's where the risk comes in, is to have a vacancy in between tenants. It's not like slum housing where you get someone in social assistance walk in and take it the next day. It'll be in the market.
thank you very much. Richard.
Just to clarify, after all the words that have been spoken, 137 is your position, and the issues are cap, rent, vacancy, and the
Correct.
recoverable expenses.
That's correct.
Thank you.
All done?
That's it.
Do you have anything else?
No.
We're done. Anything in summation? Nothing in summation? Good. Let's move on. Thank you much, Mr. Newfield. You can get back into the room if you want. Thank you. I was looking for that.
That's the reason I had bad numbers.
Mr. Penner, the next file is do we have to have a talk outside before we do that? We don't have to, we can just deal with it, right? We're going to deal with it anyway, right? We're going to deal with it. 260 Jarvis.
Yes.
Read it on the record.
Yes, the file number is 19-140. Roll number is 14001195000. Value in the roll is $332,000. And I ask that it be confirmed.
Everybody's in it. We got one question on it.
No, confirmed.
Okay.
One
Yeah.
question. Have you been in touch with the owner on it?
No, I have not.
None of the questions.
Which question? Oh, how about the recommendation you had on the 53.3B? You wanted the,
Okay, I suppose I would speak to that. We haven't received a mailer back. The supporting documentation starts on page 11 through 14 is the mailer, the registered mailer that went out, and we received no response back from the owner. So on that basis, if there was to be a reduction, we would ask for non-cooperation and a deferral penalty to be applied.
okay. Thank you very much. That concludes the matter.